I heard the click of the gun before I saw it. The sound cut through the afternoon air, sharp and final like a death sentence. My daughter Samantha dropped to the ground with a sickening thud. The phone she'd been holding still recording, still capturing the moment her life was nearly stolen from her. "Don't move! Don't you dare move!" Karen screamed, the HOA president's hand shaking, her finger still on the trigger. I wasn't sure what was worse, the sound of the shot or the sudden silence that followed. My heart was in my throat as I knelt beside Samantha, my mind already calculating the next steps, keeping my calm despite everything inside me screaming for justice. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know what I was capable of. I wasn't just some homeowner. I wasn't just a father. I was FBI, and this wasn't just about my daughter anymore. This was about everything Karen had done, everything she thought she could get away with. And now it was my turn. Before the shot rang out, life was predictable, routine, peaceful even. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where the smell of freshly cut grass hung in the air and the sound of children laughing in the distance echoed in the evenings. It was the kind of place where everything seemed perfect on the surface, immaculate lawns, tidy homes, and an unwritten code of silence among neighbors. A place where, to the untrained eye, all was well. I was a federal agent, but my life outside the bureau was simple. My days began early, around 5:30 a.m., before the sun had even fully risen. The world outside was still, and in those moments, I would sit in my office, a mug of coffee in hand, the soft hum of the early morning news providing the soundtrack to my thoughts. The quietude of the moment gave me space to think, to strategize, and to plan. I had one responsibility that mattered more than any case, my daughter Samantha. She was disabled, confined to a wheelchair after an accident when she was young. But Samantha was strong, stronger than anyone I knew. She was the kind of person who found joy in the smallest things, the way the sun caught the leaves of the trees in the afternoon, the scent of rain on a dry summer day. She wasn't defined by her condition, but by her courage. It wasn't an ideal life, but it was ours. I kept to myself mostly, leaving the social drama of neighborhood meetings and HOA nonsense to those who craved it. I focused on keeping the peace, maintaining our home, and making sure Samantha had everything she needed. My job at the bureau, though demanding, was secondary to being her father. Still, beneath the calm of my daily life, there was a tension building. The HOA, the one Karen ran, was becoming more of a problem than I ever anticipated. The complaints were small at first. A fine for the lawn not being aesthetic enough, a warning for the angle of the driveway. Just petty things, nuisances that people like Karen thrived on. But slowly it grew. The fines, the rules, the manipulation. It became clear to me that the HOA wasn't just enforcing its rules. They were using them to control, to extort, to line their own pockets. I knew I had to intervene, quietly, methodically. I began collecting information, gathering evidence, and building a case. I had no idea how far things would go or what Karen would do. But I knew one thing. I wasn't just some passive observer anymore. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. The day it all exploded started like any other. I was in the middle of an investigation, sifting through paperwork, reviewing witness testimonies, when the call came in. Samantha had gone outside to do what she often did, recording footage for her own little project. She loved capturing the details of life, the kind of things most people overlooked. It was her way of interacting with the world, even when it didn't always seem to have a place for her. But on this day, her recording would turn into something far more dangerous. I had heard Karen's complaints before, her incessant griping about every little detail in the neighborhood. But today was different. Today, she had decided to confront us, and I knew it wasn't going to be a simple exchange of words. I received a text from Samantha as I was finishing my lunch. "Dad, Karen's out here. She's yelling about the garden again. Should I record this?" It was typical of her to try and document everything, but I didn't like the idea of her being out there alone with Karen, especially knowing how volatile the HOA president could be. I didn't hesitate. "Stay calm. I'll be right out," I typed back. But before I could finish my sandwich, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the name. Samantha. She's gone crazy, Dad! Samantha's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. She's got a gun. I didn't ask questions. I didn't waste time wondering how or why Karen had escalated so quickly. The second I heard those words, my mind snapped into action. The calm that had defined me was gone. My training kicked in and I moved. The HOA was right outside our house, a few houses down. By the time I reached the front door, I could see Karen standing there, her hands trembling around the barrel of a pistol, the once pretty garden now a battleground. Samantha was lying on the ground, still as a stone, her camera still in hand, capturing everything. "Get the hell off my property, Karen!" I shouted, but my words were drowned by her frantic response. "I warned you!" Karen shouted, her voice breaking with hysteria. "I warned you all to stay away. You have no right to be here." I stepped forward, trying to get closer to Samantha, but Karen pointed the gun at me, her eyes wild with fear and rage. "Don't move!" The barrel of the gun shifted toward Samantha, and in that instant, everything slowed down. Time froze for just a second, long enough for me to process it all. I didn't rush. I didn't lunge. I kept my movement steady, calm, but inside my blood was ice. And then it happened, the gunshot. I saw it. I heard it. My daughter, my world, crumpled to the ground. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, my pulse pounding in my ears. But it didn't matter. Not yet. I couldn't show emotion. Not yet. Not while she was still breathing. I knelt by Samantha's side, my eyes scanning for any signs of life. The smell of gunpowder still clung to the air. "Samantha, stay with me. Stay with me, okay?" The world around me blurred as I felt the adrenaline surging. I didn't have time to think of anything other than getting her help. I reached for my phone and dialed the one number that mattered. "Get here now," I said simply, my voice betraying nothing. "It's time." Karen had no idea who I really was. She didn't know that I had been planning this for months. She didn't know that I had already been gathering evidence against her, against the HOA. But now it was war. The ambulance arrived quickly and the scene erupted into chaos. Paramedics rushed to Samantha's side, their hands moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals, but I didn't flinch. Not even as they lifted her onto the stretcher, her small form looking so fragile, so broken. The flashing lights of the ambulance reflected off the shiny pavement, but I didn't see any of it. My focus was already elsewhere. Karen had dropped the gun by the time the paramedics arrived, her face pale with panic. She was still in shock, still trying to make sense of the situation. Her words were garbled, incoherent, as she stumbled back and forth, her hands up in helpless surrender. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected me to be anything more than the quiet neighbor who kept to himself. I watched her with cold, calculated eyes. There was no anger in me, no sense of rage. The fire had already been set inside me. Anger would cloud my judgment, and I couldn't afford that now. My daughter was in the hospital fighting for her life, and Karen was about to learn the price of underestimating me. I didn't yell at her. I didn't shout. I didn't even point a finger at her. I simply stood there, watching her, waiting for her to realize the magnitude of what she had done. The police arrived soon after, but even then I didn't step forward. They were doing their jobs, but I didn't need them. Not yet. Not until I was sure I had all the pieces in place. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from my contact in the bureau. They were already on their way, ready to handle the investigation, to do everything I needed to ensure Karen paid for what she had done. But my reaction was measured. I wasn't going to let this moment slip away. Karen's moment of panic was her last chance to make things right, but she wouldn't take it. She was too blinded by fear, by her own sense of invincibility. As they wheeled Samantha into the ambulance, I watched the doors close with a quiet finality. The noise from the outside world seemed to fade, leaving me in perfect silence. And in that silence, I made my decision. I wouldn't let this go. Not a chance. Karen had made her mistake, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised, and now it was my turn to move. The hospital was a blur. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the bright overhead lights, the hum of machines and distant voices. It all felt like a world that wasn't mine. My mind wasn't here. It was back at the house, back in the moment Karen pulled the trigger. I had only one thought: Samantha. I followed the doctors down the corridor, barely registering the faces of the nurses, the gentle tap of their shoes against the floor. The moment I walked into the emergency room, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Samantha was hooked up to machines, unconscious, her body pale and fragile. They hadn't said it outright, but I could see it in their eyes, the uncertainty. The battle was far from over. I stood there, watching her, my heart breaking with each passing second. But I didn't let it show. I couldn't. Not yet. Karen had committed an act of violence in full view of everyone, but no one seemed to realize what was really happening. The neighborhood's perfect suburban facade was already starting to crack. The police had already interviewed me, but their questions were mechanical, rehearsed. They hadn't known me, not really. They hadn't known what I was capable of. I pulled out my phone and texted a message to my contact at the bureau. "It's time. Initiate the operation." While they were setting up the official investigation, I was already laying the groundwork for something far bigger. I'd been gathering evidence on Karen's HOA for months, collecting documents, wiretaps, witness statements. It was no longer just about the shooting. It was about the years of corruption, the lies, the way Karen and her cronies had been taking advantage of every homeowner in the neighborhood. Karen had been running a racket, a series of shady deals hidden behind the facade of her community-focused organization. Embezzlement, bribery, illegal fines, all under the guise of enforcing HOA rules. But none of that mattered now. The shooting had changed everything. It had changed me. I left the hospital around midnight after Samantha had been stabilized, her vitals steady for the moment. The doctors said she would survive, but the road to recovery would be long, uncertain. I'd never felt more out of control, but at the same time, I felt a calm resolve take root within me. I couldn't afford to falter. Back at home, I sat in the dimly lit office, the only light coming from my desk lamp. The air felt thick with anticipation. The HOA board thought they were untouchable, that their influence was absolute. But I had a different idea. I'd known about their illegal dealings for months, but now Karen had gone too far. This wasn't just about justice for my daughter. This was about bringing down the whole system. I pulled up the files on my laptop, looking through the records. Falsified signatures, backroom deals, documents that would bring the whole board down if they were exposed. This wasn't going to be a simple investigation. This was a full-scale takedown, but I had to be careful. Every step had to be precise, calculated. The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. I had the leverage I needed, the tools at my disposal. The only thing left was to start pulling the strings, to set everything into motion. But even as I laid the plans, a part of me knew something that Karen didn't. She was already in over her head. And now she would face the consequences. By the time the police investigation began, I was already a step ahead. They were still asking questions about the shooting, about the motive, about the why and how. But I knew the truth. Karen had fired in a fit of rage. But what they didn't know, what no one outside of a select few could have known, was the web of corruption I had been quietly unraveling for months. Karen had no idea who I really was. She saw me as a regular homeowner, a father who, like so many others, had just been trying to make a life in the neighborhood. She had no idea that I had already infiltrated her little empire, already started digging into the HOA's activities. She didn't know that I was no ordinary man. She didn't know that I was FBI and had been for years. I had been undercover in this neighborhood long before Samantha was shot. I had been watching, gathering information, making connections. The HOA wasn't just a neighborhood organization, it was a criminal syndicate. A front for everything from embezzlement to fraud, money laundering to bribery. I had seen the way Karen ran the board, the way she played the system, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The shooting, however, had forced my hand. I needed to act fast. While the police and the local authorities tried to piece together the details of the shooting, I was already working with my contacts at the bureau. I couldn't let them do this the slow way, not when I had already gathered evidence that could bring Karen and her entire board down. I contacted agents I trusted, people I had worked with in the past, and quietly set up an operation. The first step was gathering all the documents I had amassed. The second was making sure the right people saw them. I didn't tell Samantha any of this. She didn't need to know. She needed to focus on healing, on getting better. But I knew that this wasn't just about the physical wounds she'd suffered. It was about the deeper, systemic damage that had been inflicted on the whole neighborhood. And I was going to be the one to fix it. As I made the call to my federal team, I felt the shift inside me. Karen had made her mistake. She had pulled the trigger, and in doing so, she had exposed herself. The Bureau was already mobilizing. They had the resources, the manpower, the legal clout. They would handle the official side of things. The arrests, the warrants, the legal proceedings. But I was already thinking beyond that. I wasn't just going to watch as Karen and her cronies were taken down by the law. I was going to ensure she paid for what she had done. And I was going to make sure it wasn't just for the shooting. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. And I had the tools to make sure Karen got exactly what she deserved. The gears of the plan were already in motion, but I couldn't afford to rush. Everything needed to be precise. Patience, in this line of work, was the difference between success and failure. While the Bureau began its investigation into the shooting and began the paperwork to seize evidence from Karen's properties, I focused on ensuring that every last piece of the puzzle was in place. I started with the financials. Karen's HOA was a ticking time bomb, and I had been collecting evidence of their corruption for months, records of embezzlement, funds funneled into personal accounts, bribes from contractors looking to do business in the neighborhood. I went through everything again, meticulously cataloging every document, every transaction, every lie they'd told, but I couldn't just drop the evidence in their laps. That would be too easy, too quick. This had to be surgical. I needed to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. I also needed to set the stage for Karen's downfall, to ensure that she wouldn't have a leg to stand on when everything unraveled. I knew where Karen's weak points were. The thing about powerful people, people who think they can do no wrong, is that they always leave traces. There were board members who had been in on the scam for years, people who had accepted kickbacks, who had signed off on fraudulent documents. I couldn't go after them all at once, not yet, but I knew the key players, Karen, her right-hand man, Greg, and the treasurer who had been moving money into offshore accounts. I made a call to an old contact, a forensic accountant I had worked with in the past. I needed someone to go over the books and make sure I wasn't missing anything. As soon as I hung up, I got to work on the next part of the plan, gathering witnesses. People who had been too scared to speak up. People who had seen the corruption but hadn't dared to say anything. The HOA had a way of silencing dissent, through threats, manipulation, and in some cases outright intimidation. But now, with the right leverage, I could bring them all forward. In the background, I also set up a sting. I had gathered enough evidence on Karen's illicit dealings with contractors, but I needed more. I needed her to confess. I needed her to make a mistake, one that would seal her fate. My plan was simple. I would set a meeting with Karen under the guise of discussing an urgent HOA matter, all while recording the conversation. I knew Karen's ego would be her downfall. She wouldn't be able to resist boasting about her success, about how she had managed to run the HOA like a personal cash machine. I spent the next few days preparing, setting up everything just so. Every call was timed, every meeting scheduled with precision. I made sure that every conversation I had with witnesses and informants was documented. Every piece of evidence was carefully preserved. I needed to ensure that once this thing started, there was no way back for Karen, no way for her to escape the consequences of her actions. The moment had come. I sat in my car outside the HOA office, the air thick with anticipation. The sting was set. I had arranged for the meeting under the guise of discussing the HOA's future, something Karen would never refuse. She had always seen herself as the queen of the neighborhood, a woman who controlled everything and everyone. It was exactly this arrogance that would be her undoing. I checked my phone again, 2 minutes until she would arrive. I felt a calm settle over me. There was no room for emotion now. This wasn't personal. It was about righting a wrong, about bringing justice where it had been long denied. The sound of her car pulling into the lot snapped me from my thoughts. She stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. She was wearing the same confident expression she always had, an expression that said, "I'm untouchable." I couldn't help but smirk. Karen, for all her power, was walking straight into the trap I'd set. I greeted her with a polite smile as she walked into the office. "Glad you could make it," I said, gesturing for her to sit across from me. She didn't seem suspicious. "Not yet." "Of course," she said, smiling that tight, practiced smile. "I always make time for HOA matters." I led her into the conversation slowly, keeping my tone neutral, almost casual. "I've been going over the board's records again. I think we have some discrepancies, some things that don't quite add up." She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What kind of discrepancies?" I let her talk. I wanted her to feel like she was in control, that she had the upper hand. As she did, I could see her ego swelling, her words becoming more confident. She was getting comfortable, and that was exactly what I needed. "You know," I said after a pause, "it's impressive, really, how you've managed all of this. The way you've handled everything behind the scenes, making sure no one gets in your way, making sure the money flows where it needs to." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't catch the trap I was setting. She leaned back in her chair, a smug smile creeping onto her face. "Well, thank you. It hasn't been easy, but I've always believed in doing things the right way. Some people just don't understand how hard it is to keep things running smoothly." I didn't say anything, letting the silence linger for a beat too long. I needed her to feel confident in her story, and that's when I made my move. "I've been talking to a few contractors," I said casually, "and it seems like there's been some money changing hands under the table. It seems like the HOA funds haven't been used exactly the way they were supposed to. I think you've been using your position for personal gain, using it to line your pockets." Her expression shifted instantly, but she was quick to recover. Her face hardened. "What are you talking about?" I kept my voice even, controlled. "I'm talking about the bribes, the illegal contracts, the fake fines that never made it to the bank. And I'm talking about the gunshot wound you just put into my daughter's body." Karen, her eyes widened, and in that brief moment, I saw her fear, the mask cracking just enough for me to see the real woman beneath. The arrogant, untouchable queen of the neighborhood was now looking at me like a cornered animal. The trap was set. She knew it. I knew it. And now there was no way for her to escape. "I'm not here to make threats, Karen," I said quietly, standing up. "I'm here to make sure the truth comes out. You've been running this HOA like it's your personal empire, but you've forgotten one thing." She stood up as well, her hands trembling. "You're threatening me?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm exposing you. The truth always comes to light eventually." I activated the recorder in my pocket, her words now captured forever. She didn't know it yet, but her confession was already on tape. The game had changed, and she was losing. Her arrogance turned to desperation, but it was too late. She had already played her cards, and I had watched every move. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity, but the preparation was over. The evidence I had gathered was irrefutable, the trap was set, and the moment to expose Karen had arrived. I had contacted local authorities, coordinated with my federal team, and made sure that every piece of the puzzle was in place. Now it was time for the public to see Karen for who she really was, the woman who had used her position of power to manipulate, embezzle, and, ultimately, shoot my daughter in cold blood. The public exposure was swift and unforgiving. The moment the news of the shooting spread, people started coming forward with their own stories, stories of fines levied for trivial reasons. Neighbors bullied into compliance, contractors who had been paid off under the table. The HOA's perfect suburban image began to crumble under the weight of the truth. The real blow came when I arranged a press conference. It wasn't just for the neighborhood, it was for the world. The moment the doors opened, I stepped up to the podium, the weight of the moment sinking in. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, and a mix of local officials. But they weren't there to hear from Karen. They were there to hear the truth. I started slowly, carefully. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you not just as a concerned parent, but as someone who has uncovered the deep corruption within our HOA." I paused for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle in. The cameras clicked, flashes lighting up the room. and I could see the first signs of panic in Karen's eyes as she sat in the front row, her face paling by the second. "This woman," I continued, nodding toward Karen, "has been using the HOA as her personal cash machine. She's been embezzling funds, extorting contractors, and falsifying records. But most of all, she's been hurting people. Her actions have damaged this community, and she's taken advantage of her position to do it." The murmurs in the room began to rise, and Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I could see her trying to maintain control, but the cracks were starting to show. "And it didn't stop there," I added. "When she felt threatened, when she realized that I was onto her, she pulled the trigger on my daughter. But that wasn't her first crime. No, it was just the final one in a long list of offenses." I turned to the cameras, to the reporters, making sure to hold her gaze. "This isn't about one mistake. This is about a pattern of manipulation, of lies, of greed. This is about holding her accountable for the damage she's done." The room went quiet. I could feel the shift. The power had swung in my direction. Karen stood up abruptly, her face a mix of disbelief and fury. "This is outrageous!" she yelled, her voice cracking. "I've done nothing wrong!" But her words fell on deaf ears. The weight of the evidence, the testimony of witnesses, and the sheer power of the press conference had already sealed her fate. The media descended on her, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Karen's attempts to deflect only made her look weaker. She tried to walk out of the room, but local authorities were already moving in. They had the warrants, they had the proof, and they were ready to arrest her. I watched from the back of the room as she was escorted out, her shoulders slumped, her dignity shattered. Her downfall had been swift, inevitable, and entirely self-inflicted. As she was taken away in handcuffs, I felt a strange sense of peace. The battle was over. The truth had come to light. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe again. The arrest was just the beginning. What followed was a series of legal battles that would strip Karen of everything she had fought to protect: the power, the money, and the illusion of control she had carefully cultivated within the HOA. But it was more than just legal proceedings. It was a moment of poetic justice, one that mirrored the very crime she had committed. Karen, the woman who had always prided herself on being above reproach, who had used her position to destroy lives and manipulate the system, now found herself helpless. Her wealth, her influence, her carefully constructed empire, all of it unraveled in a matter of days. The community that once feared her now watched as she was dismantled piece by piece. As the trial began, the weight of the evidence I had gathered came to light. The recordings from the sting operation, the financial records I had uncovered, the witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out, all of it played out in the courtroom. The truth couldn't be denied, and the world finally saw Karen for what she truly was: a criminal hiding behind the veil of authority. The turning point came when the contractors, the ones she had extorted for years, took the stand. One by one, they detailed the bribes, the falsified contracts, and the threats Karen had made to ensure her monopoly on neighborhood deals. But the most damning testimony came from a former HOA member who had secretly recorded conversations with Karen, where she boasted about her ability to control everything, from the fines imposed on residents to the money funneled into her private accounts. By the time the verdict came down, there was no room left for doubt. Karen was convicted on multiple charges, including embezzlement, fraud, and most importantly, attempted murder for shooting my daughter. Her assets were seized, her name tarnished beyond repair, and she was sentenced to a long prison term. As she was led away in handcuffs, I felt the full weight of the justice that had been delivered, not just for Samantha, but for the entire community that had been manipulated for so long. Karen's empire had fallen, and with it, the grip she had held over the lives of so many. But the true poetic justice, the part that felt most satisfying, came when I walked out of the courthouse and into the arms of my daughter. Samantha had made it through her recovery, the physical wounds slowly healing, but the emotional scars would take longer. Still, we had won. And that victory, seeing the woman who had tried to destroy us stripped of everything, was worth every moment of the struggle. as I looked at Samantha, her smile as bright as it had ever been, I realized that justice had been served in the most complete way possible, not just through the legal system, but through the resilience of a daughter who refused to let fear define her. Months passed since the trial, and life slowly began to settle back into its rhythm. The echoes of the chaos that had disrupted our lives faded, replaced by the quiet hum of daily existence. But in the stillness, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, the way everything had unfolded, the lessons learned, and the justice that had been delivered. Piece by piece, Samantha was healing, both physically and emotionally. The scar from the shooting would always remain, but it had become just another part of her, another battle won. She was stronger than anyone realized, and I was proud of her in ways that words couldn't fully capture. Her resilience, her courage through the whole ordeal had been nothing short of remarkable. It was the kind of strength that came from within, a quiet determination to keep going no matter what. As for me, the experience had shifted something inside me. I had always been calm under pressure, always the one to maintain control in the face of adversity. But this had been different. I had faced the kind of darkness that you never expect to encounter. I had watched my daughter fight for her life, and I had been forced to confront a system of corruption that was far deeper and more dangerous than I ever imagined. But through it all, I had stayed true to myself. I had stayed calm, focused, precise. I had done what needed to be done, not out of vengeance, but out of a sense of responsibility. Responsibility to my daughter. Responsibility to the community that had been deceived and manipulated, and responsibility to the truth. The greatest lesson I learned, however, was the importance of patience. I had been patient through the investigation, patient through the planning, and patient in executing the plan. I knew that justice would come, not just because the law demanded it, but because the truth had a way of revealing itself in the end. Karen's arrogance had been her downfall, and in a way, it was a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, was untouchable. But what I realized most of all was this: justice isn't just about punishment. It's about balance. It's about restoring what was lost, righting the wrongs, and ensuring that those who harm others face the consequences of their actions. In the end, it wasn't just about bringing Karen down. It was about making sure that my daughter and everyone else she had hurt could move forward with their lives. That's what made the victory truly satisfying. Now, as I stood in the quiet of our home, watching the world outside, I realized that life had a way of balancing things. Even after everything that had happened, even after all the pain and suffering, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done what was right. And in that moment, I knew I had. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has transpired, I can't help but ask myself, what would you do if someone hurt your child's peace? Would you fight, or would you simply walk away? It's easy to get lost in anger, to let revenge consume you. But sometimes the real strength lies in the calm, the quiet determination to do what's right, no matter how difficult it may be. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It speaks with the clarity of truth, with the weight of patience, and with the finality of what is earned through integrity. If you've ever been wronged, if you've ever felt like the system failed you or your loved ones, I want to hear from you. How would you handle it? What would your path to justice look like? Tell me below. And, as always, if you want more stories of true justice and the strength it takes to bring it about, don't forget to subscribe. Your story, your voice, it all matters.